Please welcome Jeffrey Rudell.
So, my last Thanksgiving ended spectacularly at 5 minutes after 5 in the afternoon. Now, when I say last, I don't mean previous, and when I say ended, I don't mean that's when we finished eating. I'm referring to a moment many years ago now when Thanksgiving ceased to be a holiday, when it disappeared from the calendar completely. At least it did in my family. For this to make any sense to you, I have to give you some background. Both of my parents are sort of lower middle class people with upper lower class educations. My father is a foreman at a paper mill. My mother was a bank teller. They wanted better out of life, but weren't quite sure how to get it. We lived in a split level house in a subdivision development that had gone bankrupt shortly after they bought into it. In 1974, for reasons no one yet knows, my father came home and announced to my mother that he had sold everything and bought a farm 60 miles away. The farm was 280 acres of untilled clay, a heap of rusting equipment, and 3 Holstein cows. My mother said, "That's nice, dear," and then sent me out of the room so that they could discuss it. And they did discuss it, or rather she discussed it all afternoon and late into the night. My bedroom, being right above their bedroom, gave me an opportunity to hear my mother argue a point which was already made moot by the fact that my father had sold the house out from under her. 3 weeks later, we packed up everything and we moved. Everything including my mother's prized set of chartreuse-colored Russell Wright crystal, complete with champagne flutes, stemmed dessert goblets, and a punch bowl. Within a month of arriving on this farm, my father, to his credit, had placed an order for seed corn for the spring planting, gotten the tractor up and running, and purchased a bull in order to increase the size of our herd. The bull came on March 1st, and again on March 2nd and March 3rd, and then completely lost interest in the cows. The next 9 months went pretty much as you might expect, which is to say, farming is not for amateurs, so any mistakes that could be made were made, beginning with breeding cows in March. The first cow went into labor at 4 o'clock Thanksgiving morning. Now, we were in the grip of a Michigan snowstorm, so in the cold of the barn, the calf died less than 2 hours later. My father, seeing his assets frozen on the barn floor, decided to take desperate measures to protect his remaining investment. So he covered the floor of our front room with a large plastic tarp, put down a bed of straw, and brought the remaining 2 cows into the house to have their calves. The first at 9:30, the second at 10 a.m. By noon, both mothers were back in the barn, and their offspring were safe and warm and sleeping in the room next to our kitchen. My father put a big bale of straw in front of the door to keep them in place. Now, while my father and I were taking care of cows, my mother was in the kitchen, slamming pots and pans and muttering under her breath. You see, the front room where the cows were also happened to be where our furnace was, so that great, robust aroma of life, in this case made up of cow shit and afterbirth, was drawn in, heated to a consistent 78 degrees, and then blown out through every heat vent in the whole house. As was her habit, my mother removed from her china cabinet 1 tiny pale green crystal cordial glass into which she poured a single jigger of sherry to sip while she cooked. Now, at no other time during the year did my mother drink because she's a diabetic, and to the best of my knowledge, no other piece of crystal was ever used. I did see her once take everything out and wash it when it had become dusty, but other than that, just this 1 cordial glass. So the afternoon passed, relatives arrived, the bread came out of the oven, the table was set. My grandmother made mention of the awful smell in the house, but a look from my mother was enough to keep her from mentioning it a second time. At 5 o'clock, the turkey went on the table, the bread was sliced, the side dishes went on the sideboard, and we sat down to dinner. My grandfather said grace. Now, while God was being distracted by my grandfather, spirits of a lesser sort overcame these calves, and first one and then the other leapt over the bale of straw and came bounding into the kitchen on wobbly legs, horns a-blowing, and crashed into the table. What happened next happened kind of fast. I'll try to get it all in, but my mother, of course, screamed, picked up her cordial glass, stood up, knocked over her chair, and sort of backed into a corner. My grandmother, overweight and arthritic, and with a pair of wobbly legs herself, I think was trying to push herself away from the table, but succeeded only in pushing herself over and landing with a thud on Buffy, our golden retriever, who let out a yelp and hightailed it out of the room. My father, more sort of startled by the screams of our dog and my mother, sort of half stood, half lunged at this calf, which by now had its face in his plate. I remember with utter clarity the blank expression on my mother's face as she watched my father rise a little, reach for, but not quite reach equilibrium, and then fall backward into the china cabinet. My father was okay, and my grandfather and the dog, but every single piece of crystal, everything shattered, save for that one glass my mother held in her hand. We never had another Thanksgiving together. And for the remainder of their marriage, that glass sat on my mother's dressing table with her wedding ring in it. True story. On the fourth Thursday of every November since, my mother has made a simple dinner of roast veal, which we always eat in complete silence. Thank you.
Rudell.